The honourable member for Eglinton-Lawrence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin my remarks, I would like to indicate that I will be splitting my time with my friend and colleague, the member for Surrey Centre. Mr. Speaker, I am honoured to speak today to Bill C-22, which will create for the first time a National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. There can be no more important obligation of government than the responsibility to protect the safety and security of its citizens, both at home and abroad. But there is another equally important obligation for government in a country like Canada that values our hard-earned freedoms, our democracy, and the rule of law, an obligation to uphold the Constitution of Canada and to ensure that all laws respect the rights and freedoms we enjoy as people who live in a free and democratic society. The need to balance these two obligations simultaneously lies at the heart of the bill before us today, Mr. Speaker. This legislation responds to the threats and attacks that have afflicted countries around the world, including Canada and some of our closest allies, and in the face of which we must remain clear-eyed and ever vigilant. And Bill C-22 also responds to the many calls over many years for enhanced accountability of departments and agencies with national security responsibilities. Honourable members will remember that these calls intensified last year when the previous government introduced the Anti-Terrorism Act 2015, also known as Bill C-51 at the time. Then, our party made the argument that Canada's approach to national security legislation should avoid both naivete on the one hand and fear-mongering on the other. The threats are real, and so is the need to protect civil liberties. That is why we included improvements to our national security framework, including the creation of a National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians as a major part of our campaign platform in the last election. The bill before us would establish a committee with 9 members. 7 of the committee members will be drawn from the House of Commons, of which only 4 can be government members. 2 members will be drawn from the other place. Mr. Speaker, this committee will be different from other committees and offices established to review security and intelligence matters. In the accountability system now in place, some review bodies can access classified documents, but only for a specified department or agency. The members of these committees are not sitting parliamentarians. Where parliamentarians do have a role, they do not have access to classified documents. Existing independent review bodies, including the Security and Intelligence Review Committee, which reviews CSIS, the Office of the Communications Security Establishment Commissioner, and the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the RCMP, none of these bodies includes sitting parliamentarians. On the other hand, parliamentary committees examine security and intelligence matters, but carry out their mandates primarily through listening to testimony at public meetings. In the other place, the Standing Senate Committee on National Security and Defence has a broad mandate to examine any legislation or issues related to national defence or security. In this House, the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security studies legislation or issues related to Public Safety Canada and the other agencies in the public safety portfolio. They do exceedingly valuable and good work, Mr. Speaker, but as a rule, neither of these committees has access to classified information. They have neither the mandate nor the resources to dig deep into the details of national security matters in order to hold the government and national security agencies truly accountable. Under the bill before us today, members of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians will obtain the appropriate level of security clearance and will therefore have access to highly classified security and intelligence information regarding national security and intelligence activities across the Government of Canada. I would also point out, Mr. Speaker, that our Five Eyes partners have review bodies that function in similar ways. In those countries, select parliamentarians have access to highly sensitive intelligence so that they can help to protect the public interest in regards to civil rights, while also helping to protect public safety by ensuring that national security organizations are functioning effectively. Until now, Canada has been alone among the Five Eyes partners in not having a committee where parliamentary representatives can access classified information. This bill closes that gap. In fact, Mr. Speaker, in some regards, our proposal goes further than our allies in the Westminster democracies. This committee will review any and all government departments and agencies that are involved in security and intelligence. It will also have the authority to investigate ongoing operations. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to establishing a national security accountability mechanism, the bill before us sets a new standard that some of our allies might well follow. The powers given to this committee, its members, and its secretariat are robust, Mr. Speaker. The committee will be able to access any information it needs to conduct its reviews, subject to some specific and reasonable limitations. And as is the case with similar committees in other countries, while committee members won't be able to publicly divulge the classified information to which they will have access, they will be empowered to bring tremendous pressure to bear on a particular agency or on the government of the day by letting Canadians know if something is not right. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, this new committee represents a major step forward in strengthening the accountability of our national security and intelligence system. It will give the people's representative a true opportunity to evaluate our national security policies and operations and ensure that both Canadians' safety and their civil liberties are protected. And for those reasons, I urge honourable members to join me in supporting this very important and historic bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Salaberry-Sirois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank my colleague for his discussion about the creation of the National Security Committee. This committee is something the NDP wanted to have established, and we've been talking about it for 35 years. It has never been set up. We need to make sure that Canadians can once again trust our national security system, especially after Bill C-51 was brought in by the Conservatives and the Liberals. So we have to make sure that we protect Canadians' privacy and obviously protect security as well. Even though this is a step in the right direction, that is the creation of this committee, there has been a lot of criticism from various experts because people think that the Prime Minister's power should be limited when it comes to deciding on whether reports would be made public or not. There is nothing that requires that the final report would be presented in its entirety. So there is somewhat of a lack of transparency, and we need Canadians to be able to trust this committee. So I would like to know what my colleague thinks of this, whether there shouldn't be an amendment.
Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her question. I would like to share the sentiment that there has been for quite some time a public conversation about the need to elevate the standards of accountability through the creation of a parliamentary oversight committee. We heard earlier today in the House that the origins of that conversation go as far back to the late 1970s and early 1980s when the MacDonald Commission recommended as much. And I would also like to take this opportunity to point out all of the hard work of my colleagues, the member for Charlottetown and the parliamentary secretary to the president of the Treasury Board for their work in past sessions where they advanced the important work of elevating the standard of transparency and accountability through the creation of a parliamentary oversight committee. And so for all of those reasons, I am very proud today to stand here in support of Bill C-22.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for his speech, but it is striking to hear the way the government members are characterizing this legislation. In my speech, I read directly from it. Some of the ways in which it is very clear that this legislation is dominated from beginning to end. The process is dominated from the beginning to the end by the Prime Minister's office. And I would ask to specifically hear his reflections on Section 21, Sub 5, which I asked the Government House Leader about, which says that the Prime Minister can exclude from the final report information which he believes subjectively would be injurious to international relations. Now, if you're going to have such a general criterion that doesn't even reference security in it, in that particular criterion, shouldn't there at least be some external expert review of the Prime Minister's use of this power? Because otherwise, this exercise is totally meaningless. If the Prime Minister can, for such a justification, limit the tabling of information in the House, then surely that's not in any way a substantive check on the power of the government.
Honourable member for Eglinton-Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for the question, and I have taken him up on his offer to take a look at proposed Section 21, Sub 5. And the first thing that I would point out to my colleague is that there is, in fact, a reference to the word security. He just indicated that there was none. And so I just want to clarify that there are certain important thresholds which do inform the Prime Minister's discretion when it comes to having an ongoing dialogue with the committee about the nature of the report which will be filed in this House as is required by the legislation. The other important thing that I'd like to point out to my colleague is that the section does require the Prime Minister to consult with the chair of the Parliamentary Oversight Committee, and so when it comes to consultation and it comes to having a two-way dialogue, I'm very proud of the way our government has raised the standards on both of those important principles, something which the honourable member and his party could do well to learn. Thank you.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for